Now, as protests rage in Bangladesh, President Mohammed Shahabuddin has dissolved the parliament and appointed Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus as the head of the interim government in that nation. Now, the country has been gripped by violent protests for days now. Let's unpack these developments in Bangladesh and also look at South Africa hosting the G20 Summit. SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena joins us live in studio. Sophie, of course, before we even get into Bangladesh, there's now breaking news coming out of Zimbabwe. This is a country that has been in the news quite recently. You think about the arrests of the activists, you think about the SADC summit as well.
Yes, President Emmerson Mnangagwa today was addressing the youth gathering in Harare, Zimbabwe. You know that the young people, particularly the youth wing of ZANU-PF, has been pushing for a third term for President Emmerson Mnangagwa, and he hasn't been forthright in terms of his views, whether he will agree to the structures of ZANU-PF should they ask him to contest elections for the third time. But you know that the constitution of Zimbabwe, you can only be a president for only 2 terms, and therefore there were concerns that maybe ZANU-PF will push for the constitutional amendment so that Mnangagwa can come back as the president for the 3rd term. But I think due to pressure, today, President Mnangagwa sought to clarify this matter, talking about the importance of respecting the Constitution. And this comes ahead of the much talked about SADC meeting. As you know, that our President Cyril Ramaphosa will also attend that meeting next week. And also, end of the month, during the agricultural show in Zimbabwe, President Mnangagwa has invited President Ramaphosa. Earlier on, the president's spokesperson saying that the president will honor that invitation. And I think Mnangagwa is trying to pave way in terms of toning down the rhetoric, but also in terms of the temperature in that country. Because earlier on, before I came here, I saw visuals from Zimbabwe. You see the military vehicles in the streets and the security vehicles in the streets, the police. And the question is why this heightened security. But perhaps let's take a listen at what President Mnangagwa had to say earlier on addressing the young people. Let's listen in.
Besides being a soldier, I'm a trained lawyer. I'm a constitutionalist. I want our party, our leadership, our people to be constitutionalists. We must abide by the provisions of our constitution to the letter. Kana nguwe kuti uinde inda, no inda.
At the end there, speaking in Shona, President Mnangagwa saying that when the time has come for one to leave, one must leave, and he will leave. We must respect the Constitution. So perhaps this is the clearest indication that the pressure that's being there in terms of him leaving office after the 2nd term, it's actually gaining traction, and he is taking note of what's being said. Because if you remember very well, after he went back to Zimbabwe, after he was in exile in South Africa because of the standoff with the then president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, he promised the world that he will do things differently. And perhaps this is a sign that he will get something right, much as there are challenges in that country, and some people in that country are aggrieved, as you saw the arrest of politicians, arrests of activists, and there's now more pressure ahead of the SADC meeting, people hoping that SADC will engage President Mnangagwa. But there he is talking about members of ZANU-PF, particularly the military wing, who are opportunistic in every event, singing and giving an indication that he must come back for a third term. But the question is, will this happen? Because that's what Mugabe used to say, and finally he didn't. Who can forget that Asante Sana moment, even at the 11th hour when he was under pressure, not resigning, even though he had prepared a speech to resign. So politicians, you only trust when what they say is implemented.
And of course, that's always the big question, is it going to happen? But speaking about interesting developments, we saw Muhammad Yunus heading up now Bangladesh in the interim. How has this news been received?
Well, on the ground, particularly the young people did put pressure in terms of ensuring that he is the interim leader of government. As you know, there's a president with no executive powers, and therefore he was in France, he's flying back to Bangladesh. As you know, that the regime was actually harassing him. And this is a man that is no stranger to South Africa. I would recall in 2009, he came to South Africa to deliver Nelson Mandela lecture and the 7th lecture. He came up to South Africa again. I remember it was a Women's Month, and the former First Lady Zanele Mbeki through Sawit had organized an event, and she invited him to come and address the women, because you know that Zanele Mbeki started a women's, it's not a bank, but it's almost like a cooperative. And you know that the professor in Bangladesh had started what is known as Grameen Bank. And that bank is similar to what Ms. Zanele Mbeki started in South Africa, particularly with women on the countryside in the rural area, where they tap into the resources, they put money, and later they take money and they plow and they invest in their small businesses. And the last time he also came to South Africa during a one-goal event, you know, fighting hunger, using the example of this bank that he started as an example countries can do, particularly poorer countries, to address the issue of hunger. But then he was harassed, he was removed as the founding member of the bank, and he fled the country. He spent most of his time outside the country because the regime was really harassing him.
And I mean, you think about the fact that, of course, right now there's lots of developments in that country around the protests and what young people had been saying and really wanting their voices to be heard. What's the latest in that regard?
Well, the young people, for now, there's no protest as they wait for him to come, but he has already issued a statement that he's willing to assist. We'll bring you that story later on, and Kaya Kumalo was looking at that issue. We will definitely bring you a comprehensive report on the latest in Bangladesh.
And let's talk about another interesting story. President Cyril Ramaphosa again hosting the G20 leaders in South Africa next year. Let's chat about the significance of this particular moment given the way the situation is globally.
Well, I think this is a very important gathering of developed countries and developing countries, most industrialized countries around the world. This group was launched in 1999. You'd recall at that time the president was Thabo Mbeki. And South Africa was invited to be part of this group. We are the only country, South Africa is the only country that is part of the G20. But last year, the AU was invited to be a permanent member of the G20, similarly to what's happening with the European Union. This is very important. You're going to have your heads of state and government from these industrialized nations. We had earlier on when the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, congratulated President Ramaphosa after he was able to announce the cabinet and after the inauguration that he at that time indicated that he will be attending the G20 meeting in South Africa, but it's not going to happen because he has since dropped out of the race. And therefore, the President of the United States of America will have to attend this G20 meeting. If it is Donald Trump, it will be very interesting because you'd recall during her tenure, he didn't take note of Africa in particular. He didn't pay attention to Africa. He never visited the continent. If it's Kamala Harris, it's going to be much better. I'm sure she would want to come to South Africa because her being a woman and woman of color, the struggle in South Africa, and women in South Africa, I think she will be willing to come to South Africa, but when it's Donald Trump, we don't know. And South Africa can use this gathering to again position itself on the global map in terms of issues that are related to trade and investment. But as you pointed out, the challenge now is that when the G20 is meeting, on the agenda you always have the war in Ukraine and now the Middle East, and these two issues are likely going to derail the summit. Therefore, the president's expertise will be needed in terms of driving the meeting to ensure that they focus on the global economy, because even South Africa wants to see a different situation in relation to the economy of South Africa. Therefore, you'll have to find a way that issues that are related to the conflict don't derail the summit. The other problem is that will the Russian president come? Remember, Russia is part of G20. We are again going to see that argument. Putin mustn't come. Putin is coming because Russia is a member of the G20.
Like I always say, there's no rest for you, possibly at least 3 hours of sleep a day, because there's so much happening, you know, on the global front. But also speaking about our president, he's undertaking a working visit to Angola. Now, there's developments in the DRC. That has been a serious story that we've also carried here on the channel regularly. So are these developments there likely to also overtake or even be part of the discussions with President Lourenco?
Definitely. As we speak today, you had officials that are responsible for intelligence from Rwanda, from the DRC, and that meeting was chaired by the Foreign Affairs Minister of Angola, trying to prepare, we are told, for what could be a meeting, a first meeting of both President Kagame and President Tshisekedi after a long time. But yesterday I saw President Tshisekedi spoke to many broadcasters in that region and also in his country, trying to set a tone in terms of what he wants to see in relation to the negotiations. One, he doesn't want to meet the rebel movement, that is M23, but he's willing to meet Paul Kagame. But the meeting, in that meeting, he wants to communicate to Paul Kagame that what he's doing is wrong. He is not engaging. And I think President Ramaphosa, with the South African troops in the DRC, will speak to the president of Angola and try and find a solution. You'd remember during the commemoration of the genocide in Rwanda, we were in Rwanda, the president attended the commemoration, and we spoke to the president. The president said that yes, the military can assist, but finally you must have a political solution. The same was said by the former South African President Thabo Mbeki, who was involved in the Sun City talks, bringing together the warring factions within the DRC, but in the region, because if you want to address the problem of DRC, you can't leave out the neighbors, particularly Burundi, your Uganda and Rwanda, and therefore that Great Lakes region can only be at peace if you involve all the leaders in the Great Lakes region. And therefore I think the president will emphasize that there must be a political solution, because military can never be a solution. Military doesn't resolve problems.
And of course, lots of developments here on this front, and we'll continue talking about some of these important stories and to bring you all the developments geopolitically. Thank you so much, Sophie. That was my colleague there, Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor.